On January 12, 2010, a powerful earthquake hit Haiti. It quickly became one of the deadliest disasters in modern history. But here's the question we're going to dig into. Was it really just a natural disaster? We're going to look at the numbers, the science, and the hidden human factors to figure out why this event was so unbelievably catastrophic. Okay, let's get into it.
First, you just have to try and wrap your head around the numbers. The earthquake killed more than 200,000 people. Just a staggering, almost unthinkable loss of life.
And it didn't stop there. On top of the deaths, over 300,000 people were injured. This completely swamped a medical system that was already struggling to begin with.
And then there's this number. In a flash, 1.5 million people were left without a home. A huge slice of the population just displaced. When you put all those numbers together, the scale of the tragedy is just devastating.
But this is where the real puzzle starts. Geologically, this was a strong earthquake for sure, but we've seen quakes like it before. So why was the result here so much worse? That's the core question we're going to unpack.
Right, so let's dig into that paradox. A 7.0 magnitude quake is serious, no doubt, but the death toll, the number of people left homeless, it just doesn't seem to line up. It's way out of proportion, and understanding that disconnect is the key to this whole story.
So, to figure out what happened above ground, we first have to understand what happened below. We need to look at the actual science of the shake, the geological forces that were unleashed that day. Okay, so here's the breakdown. It was a magnitude 7.0. It happened where the Caribbean and North American plates slide past each other. That's what we call a conservative boundary. But look, the most critical piece of information on this slide is the focal depth. The earthquake started just 13 kilometers below the surface. That is incredibly shallow.
And that shallow depth is a huge deal. Think of it like a speaker at a concert. The closer you are to the speaker, the more intense the sound is, right? It's the same idea here. Because the energy was released so close to the surface, the ground shaking was just unbelievably violent, especially in the capital, Port-au-Prince.
So, what happens when you have that kind of violent shaking in a densely populated city? You get a nation in ruins. Let's look at the cascade of impacts, from the human cost to the economy and the environment. We've seen these numbers, but now let's connect them to a direct cause. The main reason so many people died was building collapse. You see, in Port-au-Prince, countless buildings were made with cheap materials and without any of the engineering needed to withstand an earthquake. So when the ground started to shake, they just pancaked. And this chart, wow, this really puts the economic damage into perspective. The raw dollar amount of damage might have been less than an earthquake in a wealthier country, but look at the damage as a percentage of Haiti's economy, its GDP. It was over 100%. The quake didn't just damage the economy, it effectively erased it. And the hits just kept on coming. The quake caused massive landslides which buried roads and cut off entire communities. It created mountains of debris. And maybe worst of all, it wrecked the water systems. That lack of clean water led directly to a deadly cholera outbreak a few months later, adding a whole new nightmare to the disaster. Okay, but even with all that, the science, and the immediate effects, there's still only half the story. To really get why this was so bad, we have to talk about the conditions that existed in Haiti long before the ground ever started to shake. We have to talk about vulnerability.
So what do we even mean when we say vulnerability? Well, it's not about being weak. It's about the social, economic, and political cracks that are already in a society's foundation. It's the pre-existing conditions that determine whether a country can bend in a crisis or if it's just going to break.
And in Haiti, all these factors created a perfect storm. Widespread poverty forced people into poorly built homes. Weak or non-existent building codes meant there were no safety standards. A history of unstable governments meant there was no real national plan for a disaster, and limited access to healthcare meant the system collapsed the moment it was needed most. You see how they all connect? It's a chain reaction.
This comparison makes it so clear. Imagine the exact same earthquake hitting a country with low vulnerability, what we might call high resilience. Buildings are built to code, so they sway but don't collapse. Emergency services are well-funded and have a plan. The impact is managed. In Haiti, the high vulnerability meant the exact opposite happened, and the outcome was total catastrophe. And here's the truly heartbreaking part. All those factors of vulnerability that made the initial impact so deadly, they also completely crippled the rescue and recovery efforts that came after.
This quote really says it all. The world rushed to help. I mean, a huge international aid effort got going, but they immediately ran into a wall.
The will to help was there, but the ability to actually deliver that help on the ground was a whole other story.
So why was it so hard? Well, think about it. How do you get aid into a country when the main port is destroyed, the airport is damaged, and the roads are blocked by rubble? How do you coordinate when the government buildings have collapsed and officials are among the dead or missing? It was a logistical nightmare created by the very same vulnerabilities.
So when you put all of this together, the geology, the building collapses, the poverty, the broken systems, we get a completely new way to think about what we call natural disasters. It really comes down to this simple but powerful formula. A hazard, that's the earthquake, the natural part, is just the trigger. The scale of the disaster is determined when that hazard slams into a society's pre-existing vulnerability. The quake was the spark, but the vulnerability was the fuel that created the inferno.
And that brings us to one last really challenging question to leave you with. If human factors like poverty, government policies, and building codes are what really determine who lives and who dies, can we ever call a disaster like this one purely natural? It's definitely something to think about.